So I've been saying that the novel and the play are set in the 14th century, but I haven't told you how I figured that out. And one is that even if you think that, like the people on the phone, you have forgotten everything about Romeo and Juliet, you remember that there is a character whose dying words are, and you remember his dying words even if you don't remember who he is. Mercutio's dying words are, a plague on both your houses, right? Everybody remembers that. Partly because he says it 3 times, so you know it has to be important. Now, plague comes to Italy for the first time in 1348, and it kills about 40% of the population. So think about like how freaked out we get by something like Ebola. Imagine a disease killing 40% of the population when you have no real understanding of infectious disease and why some people get sick and some people don't, some people get better and some people don't. So this is one of the plague images. It's like everybody's got their coffins. They're just bringing whoever is dead today out. Some people felt certain that the plague was divine punishment. So here's God raining down arrows of plague onto the dead below. But other people noticed that, in fact, no, these are the religious prelates, and they seem to be dying along with everybody else. Some people are, and then the rich also are dying, rich fancy ladies are dying. So this is the thing about the plague, it is a great equalizer, and this is that, both those last 2 scenes are taken from this. This is the full image of it. And one of the contemporary sources talks about the symptoms of the Black Death. There's gangrenous inflammation of the throat and lungs. There are violent pains in the region of the chest. There's vomiting and spitting of blood. There's a pestilential odor from bodies and the breath of the sick. And he says, from the carbuncles and the glandular swellings, some have recovered, but once you're spitting blood, pretty much it's over with, so just look for that as a symptom. And I wanted to put that into the novel. If you know the play well, you know that there's a point where Lord Capulet says, when Paris, the prince's nephew, wants to marry her, he says, the earth has swallowed all my hopes but she. Meaning, he's had other children, it seems, who didn't live. And so I give him and the nurse both the backstory of having lost children to the plague, because I like that equalizer. But I didn't set the novel during the plague, because what interested me was, okay, so 40% of the population is dead. You don't really understand why some people die and some people live. And then it sort of goes away. And things go back to pseudo-normal afterwards. And that really interested me. Like, we have this idea of survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress disorder. But like, how did they deal with surviving something so devastating? And the plague does end up coming back in regular cycles for centuries in Europe. But there's this lull after that first big wave. And so that's when I set the novel. And that, not at the first plague, but I know it's got to be after the plague because Mercutio is talking about the plague. And the other part about knowing when to set the novel, toward some point after 1348, is that there's a prince in Romeo and Juliet. And the prince is from, he calls them the, I think he says Della Scala, or the Scala family, which is an anglicization of the Scaligeri, who are actually the ruling family. And this is the death statue of one of the Scaligeri. They had these great names. They were called Mastino, like the mastiff, and Can Grande, the big dog, and Can Signorio, the gentleman dog. So they have these like doggy nicknames. And they kill, like, it's not just like that they kill other people, brothers kill brothers to get to take the throne. They're really like sort of awful. And they lose power of Verona by 1408. So that's how I sort of decided to set the novel sometime in the late 14th century. So this is kind of a typical Italian, like, here's one town, here's another town in the background. They have these big towers, and if you think about it, people always say to me, so what's the deal? What were the Capulets and Montagues fighting about? Who the hell knows? Because revenge was like the order of the day in this time period. Families would have their own towers. This is the Lamberti Tower. And it was begun in 1172. It wasn't finished until the 15th century. And you can sort of see that there's a change of style part way up. And the reason that you want a tower like this is the view from the top of that tower, is that you can throw shit down on people underneath. And so this is another family tower. This is more a medieval style tower, but my tower is bigger than your tower. Like, I'm going to throw stuff on you. Even if you're in your tower, I can throw stuff over on your tower. So this idea of families avenging themselves is really huge. Any mafia movie or television show you have ever seen has nothing on the late medieval period in terms of revenge. There's a book from 1360s, or right in my time period, by somebody named Paolo Certaldo, and it's the book of good customs, like how to be a good person. And he says that the prime happiness for a human being is the practice of revenge. His line is, the first grief is to receive an injury. The first pleasure, to wreak vengeance. I'm so glad that you have injured me, because now. So like, honor, like, people are hunting together and it's not clear who actually killed the hind, so we're gonna have a big fight about that, and then we're gonna end up killing each other. You know, people are drinking wine and they're gambling, and they have an argument about something, and they end up killing each other, and then like revenge goes on for 3, 4, 5 generations. Sometimes you can sell it by marrying one member of your family to a member of the opposing family, which is a little bit weird and strange, but the feuds are a big part of this time period. Now the other thing, and you can sort of see it here, right, in addition to the tower, and in addition to the tower, you see, the other thing you see in the skyline is the churches, right? So churches are the other big thing dominating cities in this time period. And when I was working on the book, I started it before I went to Verona to do research, and I needed a church to be the nurses' church. And I wanted it to not be the church that Cappelletti would go to, because they're fancier, they would live in a fancier parish. So I sort of picked this one looking at a map of churches and which ones exist in that time period. I decided that the nurse would worship at San Fermo. That's where she and her husband Pietro would have gone earlier in their lives, including when their sons were still alive. Because remember, I revealed to you that she had these sons who died before the book ever starts. So the baby she has, who dies, who's the same age as Juliet, is actually the last of her children, who comes to her after she's already lost all of her sons to the plague. Minor spoiler alert, it's like in the first 30 pages. And then I get to Verona and I go to visit this church that I have already put into the novel. When you walk in, and this looks pretty standard, and some of this is later than the 14th century, but I discover what I hadn't seen doing my research, sitting at home looking at books, is that there's this set of stairs you can go down. And once you get on the stairs, you get to an older church, and the older church has the older images. These are similar to some of the images that I showed you already, of saints that are frescoed onto the different pillars. And here's a close-up. There is, of course, the Madonna with the baby, and once again, in case you can't see that closely enough, like it's clear, he is not bottle-fed, this is not a formula family, this is a breastfed child. And on the pillar right next to this one is this picture, which is the adult Jesus naked with his cousin John the Baptist, like baptizing him, which is also sort of like a weirdly, you know, a lot of the religious imagery was really eroticized in this time period. And that became very interesting to me. So I'm going to read you a scene that happens, basically, if you remember the speech that from Shakespeare, it happens right about that time. Juliet has just been weaned by putting wormwood on the dog, yes, and an earthquake has just happened, so everybody's kind of freaked out. And the nurse, who wants to stay with Juliet because she loves her, she's her only child now, right, has tried to concoct a way to stay with Juliet even though she has weaned her, because that is one of the weird things about Romeo and Juliet. This child is 14, why is the woman who's her wet nurse still hanging around the house? She's concocted a way to try and stay, but she's not sure her husband is going to buy it. So she has gone to Friar Lawrence from the play, to try and get him to convince her husband, and this is what follows the scene. Is there anything else you need to know about this? So when the novel starts, Juliet is a newborn, and she's 3 by this point, because we know that from the play. Tybalt, her cousin, lives in the household, and I just picked an age for him. I have him be 10 at the beginning of the play, so he's about 13 now. Taking my leave, so she's just gone to Friar Lorenzo and sort of convinced him to tell her husband this whole plot she has about why she should get to stay with Juliet, because he would like his wife home, because although they have been having sex, they have to sneak around, because you know what happens if a woman has sex while she's breastfeeding. Takes her. Taking my leave of the friar's cell, I head to the lower church. It is the least grand part of San Fermo, yet it's always been my favorite. The paint is still being laid fresh on the frescoes in the upper church. but the saints upon the columns down below are old familiars. On this of all days, I know what I need to beg of them, of her, for it's the Holy Virgin whose favor I seek, and of all the many paintings and statues of her in Verona, it's the one in the lower church whose help I need. I know her face better than I do my own, for though I've caught an occasional glimpse of myself reflected in a puddle or a water pail, I've knelt gazing on her for countless hours. A century of fading has taken its toll on the golden crown around her head and the brightly patterned throne on which she sits. But time's not marred the pale breast where her sacred infant suckles. I'll beseech this blessed mother, who'll never wean her own holy son, to take mercy on me and ensure that what my husband will not hear from me, he'll listen to from our holy confessor. But when I climb down the steps, I see someone is already in the lower church. A youth of Tybalt's years. He stands with his back to me. He's swaying and moaning, halfway between the image of my suckling Maria and a fresco of the naked full-grown Christ, accepting his cousin's sprinkling baptism. It is not the spirit that moves this youth. It is the flesh. I come up behind him and pinch his ear. Here of all places, for the hand to be upon the prick. The prick of noon, he laughs, and sext will soon be ringing. This is a hilarious joke for many of us. Sext will, it's hilarious. I raise a hand to slap such sacrilege from him, but when he turns to face me, my open palm goes to my mouth instead. It is the prince's impish nephew, Count Mercutio. Though I recognize this Mercutio, he has no notion who I am, and well it is that he does not, for I'd not have anyone know I nearly struck a member of the royal household. Mercutio wiggles his own royal member at me. Half Verona has fallen, he says. Why not make rise what I can? Piety, debauchery. When the pestilence raged, there were those who chose the first, hoping to be saved, and those who indulged the second, fearing they would not. To desecrate a church with self-spilled seed, that's one extreme, to be sure. But it's said that in the sudden jolt of catastrophe, some who survive feel the dark premonition of their own eventual death. Mercutio may smirk with a youth's bravado, but I sense beneath it a child's desperate fear. Do not let the friars find you at that here, I say, all the reprimand I can bring myself to give him before I hurry off. First my oldest, Nunzio, then my second, Nesto, grew to such an age, when a mother must avert her eyes and pretend she does not know what her son's hand does beneath his doublet hem by day and the bed cover by night. My sons indulged themselves with especial frequency, for they had Pietro's heat. Donato, at all of 9, was not long from discovering what already pleased the elder two. But before he did, they and their 3 younger siblings all were taken. Self-pleasuring, that simple sin, one among the many things they'd never know. This Mercutio and Tybalt too, they're not much shy in years of those who brawl upon Verona's streets. And while Lord Capoletto has grown keen to take his nephew as his heir, Mercutio's uncle may not be so kind. Prince Cansignorio killed his own brother to seize his place upon the throne. What chance is there that, once his sister's son comes of age, Cansignorio will deal differently with him? That was the Odinism section, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm gonna wrap up because it's warm in here. I always say Romeo is a dirtbag. Like, this is not a romantic play. Romeo is a dirtbag who you do not want dating your 14-year-old daughter or almost 14-year-old daughter. And this is a very troubling play. But one of the things that's true about the medieval period and some of the stuff that I've talked about is it's also kind of the seeds of the Renaissance, that when 40% of the population dies, all sorts of things happen in the culture, and in some ways that's why there's a shift from what we call the medieval period into the Renaissance. Those are hard categories, like nobody can say, on this year, on this date, the medieval period ended and the Renaissance began. But some of the class mobility, some of the changes around marriage practices that happen as a result of the medieval period really lead to, or that as a result specifically of the plague, really lead to the beginning of the Renaissance. And this is one of the lines from Romeo and Juliet. In the first time that we see the friar, Romeo has just met Juliet. They have their little love scene involving what people refer to as a balcony, though there's no balcony in the play. That's one of my little pet peeves. And then he goes to see Friar Lawrence, and Friar Lawrence is speaking to himself before Romeo comes in. He says, I must upfill this osier cage of ours with his collecting herbs to practice medicine. With baleful weeds and precious juiced flowers. The earth that's nature's mother is her tomb. What is her burying grave that is her womb? And from her womb, children of diverse kind, we sucking on her natural bosom find. So, first of all, I love it because it's a breastfeeding metaphor. How excited am I about that? But also this idea that what's tomb is womb, that kind of becomes a big theme in the novel, that out of death comes life. Now, I started writing fiction as a way to teach history to what I refer to as normal people. You may not consider yourselves normal people, but what I meant was outside of academia, like how do you take academic research and actually bring it to other audiences? And so I think I'm really good at this. And then my book was a book club pick for the National Post, which is a Canadian national daily newspaper. It's a little bit like USA Today, but they do these book things and you get a full page in the newspaper, which like no book club would ever get you. It's not an ad, the newspaper picks a book and you get a full page in the newspaper. And one of the things that happens is that they pre-pick random readers across Canada who read your book and send in questions. And I got this question. Sonia Topolinsky, who works in human resources somewhere in Ontario. Sonia Topolinsky asks, we are of the thought that centuries and decades ago, sex was a wife's duty and was for procreation. In Juliet's Nurse, there were a number of erotic situations between Angelica and Pietro, none of which I've read you, by the way, which were more than a duty. Was this your imagination? Or was this research and found that we falsely believed that sex was not to be enjoyed, except with a prostitute? Hygiene was not discussed. They must have been right. I love Sonia because she tells me a lot about what normal people think about history. She has, on the one hand, what drives academic crazy, a shallow sense of history, right? Centuries and decades ago, 1964 being the same as 1364. On the other hand, this part about they must have been right. This is a new trend in history, the history of smell, and thinking about smell and also sound as a way to learn about the past. So in some ways, she's a very cutting-edge historian. She's clearly a feminist historian because she thinks gender is important. Do women get to enjoy sex or not? As you might have guessed, certainly there was an idea of some women enjoying sex in this time period. And part of what's confusing to Sonia, I will tell you the answer to her question because I want you to go out, well-educated people into the world. Catholic Church, or as it was known in the 14th century, the Church, is a very bodily church. Remember that guy bleeding on the cross, all those tortured souls? So it is very much in the body. And that church also expects that you are going to sin. And then you're going to repent, and then you're going to sin, and then you're going to repent. It would be better if you didn't sin, but the expectation of perfection really comes later, and it is much more not just of a product of the Protestants and Protestant Reformation, but specifically the 18th century, and Enlightenment and rationalism, this idea that you should be able to control yourself and just not sin in the first place, kind of comes in later. And that's when this idea of maybe women aren't enjoying sex, because in the medieval period, women actually were seen as the most lascivious, and men had to protect themselves from these lascivious women. This is not quite as liberating as we might like, because the reason is, first of all, men are more rational and women are more bodily, but also, as we all know, sin starts with Eve, and ever since Eve, women have been this source of sin and bad behavior. But yeah, women were the ones who were considered more sexually forward in this time period. And I just like my imagination versus research and finding it to be true. But the part about they must have been right also always strikes me. Like, what do you think people smelled like in the 14th century?
Yeah.
Okay, so we all see BO. Well, specifically, what is the odor of this body?
Could have been any number of oils.
All right, so we know that they were anointing themselves.
Weird things they were putting on themselves.
Right, but also, I mean, probably they smelled particularly of smoke, right? Because fire was used for your heat, for your light, for your cooking, some form of fire, right? So they were smelled a lot of smoke. They probably smelled, certainly they might have been sweating, and they were probably sweating out whatever they were eating, so you would smell like the foods that you ate. You have all had that experience of a little too much garlic at dinner, and like the next, oh God, I'm still sweating dinner.
They also ate with their hands mostly, right?
Yeah, forks were newly invented, so right, so you might have food on your hands. I mean, they did bathe. We have this myth that none of them bathed. You would smell like the clothing that you were wearing. Now, how do you think if somebody from the 14th century suddenly appeared in the 21st century, how would we smell to them? What do they think we smell like? Chemicals, like totally, right? Your hair, your skin, your clothes, your house, all of this stuff we wash with chemicals all the time. And I'm somebody with allergies, so every time I have to get in an elevator with people who are wearing all sort of product, I'm just a sneezing fit. And we probably also smell like car exhaust and whatever other things. But we have this idea that we smell great and they smell terrible. And I've taken to saying that in the 14th century, people smelled the way, this is a total example that flies in the Pacific Northwest, and it may fall flat right here in New York City, or Brooklyn, that you smell the way you do on the second to last day on a camping trip. Because on the second to last day on a camping trip, like you smell fine, you're going for a hike, or something, and then the last day of the camping trip, you suddenly wake up and you're like, oh, I smell terrible. I better go home and take a shower, because you know that that shower is waiting there. And in fact, I gave that example once, and because my first book is about the Civil War, one of my Civil War reenactor friends was in the audience, and he said, oh yeah, when we're doing our reenactment, like, we think that we smell fine, and the tourists come by to look at the reenactment, and they smell so weird to us, and then I go home, and my wife and daughter don't let me in the house until I'm like hosed off outside to wash off my 19th century set. So we just have this very ahistoricist, or a very sort of presentist notion of the past. So that was really all that I prepared, but I'm happy to answer any sort of questions that you have, and if I can't, I know there's at least one real medievalist in the room who will perhaps be called upon to help me. But thank you all for being so patient throughout. Annie, the wonderful representative of Green Apple Books, has gone upstairs to just vend books. So if you want books, she's up there, but I'm happy to stay and answer any questions you have. And if you have it. Damn it.
Come on, they smell like peony today.
Carl?
Yeah, so I'm just going to ask you to go back to a slide because I want to just talk about it.
Okay.
A little bit.
Is it the women's internal organs
Yeah,
slide?
absolutely, of course. Because I think it's a wonderful example. It's one I've never seen before, but it makes sense because standard belief in this period is that women's genitalia is simply an inverted form of male genitalia. So even if you don't read Italian, which I don't either, you can read D, which labels those as the women's testicles.
It's testicoli della donna.
Exactly.
Testicles
And
of the lady.
So basically, this is just, she's got, all women have cocks inside them naturally, they're just reversed. It's wonderful.
You just wanted to see that slide one more
Of
time.
course.
Does anybody have an actual question?
Isn't that cool? That's a question.
Yeah.
Can we go back to the slide with the devils torturing people in hell? Were they only or mostly women, and is that consistent with the idea of
I think there was a
women
guy at
being
the
punished?
bottom. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was a guy.
We don't know this person because we're seeing only the butt. For all we know, it's actually Romeo from the Zeffirelli, because we know that his butt is featured prominently there. So clearly a woman.
That's a man.
Penis at the bottom.
Penis at the bottom, right?
Although it does have a
Thomas.
female-looking head covering.
Well, yeah, but no, I think that's pretty much,
Yeah, look
He's
at
got
that.
tonsure.
not,
That's a woman.
No, the one on the, here, right there's a tonsure, so he's a
oh, yeah.
clergy.
So he's clergy,
Right,
right?
he's a friar.
Even clergy can be bad boys. I think that this is a penis. It's hard to tell.
Like the other one has
Right, they have it upside down.
Upside
He
down.
doesn't, so.
Right. Okay. So we seem to be voting that there are certainly men being tortured here as well. Does that resolve?
So kind of equal opportunity, not the idea of women being punished
No.
more for the sin of Eve.
No, not at all. I mean, women get in on the ground floor of sinning, but men are fast to join them.
Do you know exactly why the female reproductive organs were so distorted, even though female bodies were dissected and?
So I think some of it may have to do with when dissection starts to happen. And I was at the Hunterian Museum. If you enjoy Brooklyn's Morbid Anatomy Museum, I highly recommend London's Hunterian Museum because in some ways it has all these collections of specimens from this time period. And I think that part of it is that actually dissection of humans was considered forbidden, and then you start to be able to dissect like criminals who were executed, you might be able to dissect them. That really starts to happen later. And and again, this is like not my total field of expertise. But that the cutting up of the body, if you think about a dead body as needing to be returned to hallowed ground, that messing with it, I think, is part of, there's sort of, if not direct prohibitions, at least, what's the word I want? Maybe not a law, but a practice of not violating bodies in that way.
Desecration.
Right, no desecration. Thank you for that. Oh, there are all these people back there. So that 1, 2, yeah.
I was wondering if you knew anything about how menstruation was viewed in terms of being like something that was like a part of the birth cycle and just something that happens, or if it was sort of like a contemporary view where it's this like really dirty thing that needs to be like dealt with, or...
So it varies a bit. We know that there are certainly like much older religious ideas about women being unclean when they're menstruating. One of the passages that I read here is about how menstruation flushes the heat out of a woman, and so that's a good time to get pregnant right afterwards. Their understanding of the relationship between menstruation and like conception is a little bit iffy. So in the novel, there's a character who is pregnant and doesn't realize it until she goes into labor. And people are always like, how could that possibly be? And there's somebody like, no, I saw it on TV. There was this really fat lady, she went to the emergency room, she didn't know she was pregnant, and there she was giving birth. She just thought she had really bad indigestion. But the truth is that actually their notions of like how long a pregnancy was very different. So people would talk about quickening, and quickening is not the same as conception. Quickening is sort of like, when there's a baby in there. But the idea of like how long it was from quickening to delivery really varied a great deal. And one of the sources that I used was about a woman who had been convicted of a capital crime and they were going to execute her, and she said, oh, you can't execute me, I'm pregnant. And they're trying to figure out if she's pregnant, and they don't really know how to tell if she's pregnant, and they don't know how long they're going to have to wait for this pregnancy to end. And that's why I felt like it was okay to have somebody not know that they were pregnant. There's no internet. You don't even have like a friend in junior high who read a women's magazine and could tell you something. So like their access to information and the circulation of information was really, really limited. So did they have a notion of like ovulation and its relationship to the menstrual cycle? I think it's pretty fair to say no.
So for masturbation, in the medical text that you were looking at, I mean, I know religiously it was, don't do it, but were there discussions in any of the medical texts you were looking at for masturbation, either male or female?
No, not that I can recall off the top of my head, and I think like female sort of is put to the side. I mean, part of it is like, what counted as masturbation, and with males, this idea that ejaculation is sort of like, you clearly weren't just like rubbing up and down against your horse while you were riding. I don't ride horses, I don't know if that would be a ride. Or a camel, and I don't need to be horse-centric. But then from male ejaculation is the issue. But often, so one of the things, to go back to the woman who talks about the prostitute, right, sex with a prostitute, that sex with a prostitute might be tolerated because there was this idea that men did need to have a release. But that would be channeled that way. And part of what happens in this time period, there's an age difference in the age at which women are being married, which is pretty young, 14 wouldn't be unusual, versus the age at which males might marry, which might be closer to 30. And the plague actually messes with that because wealthy, powerful men want wives to have more children, and so that's taking females off the marriage market, where like somebody who's younger, even from a powerful family, might be told you're just going to have to wait. And there's some theories that that's why there was so much violence in this time. Like you have a whole bunch of guys between the ages of 15 and 25, 28 who have nothing to do all day. They're like soccer hooligans in the streets. But I think that they sort of avoid talking about masturbation by talking about other outlets for male sexuality. But that's my best guess. I don't feel like I'm the authority on that. Were there other questions?
My question's about romance, and in your research, did you like cover that topic? Because I feel there's a small amount. I mean, we see Romeo and Juliet today as a romantic. There are romantic notions in it. So I didn't know how much that was part of society at the time, or
Right, so this is
considered a responsibility.
It's more, I would say, a slightly later time period where this idea of like companionate marriage really comes in. But then there are also definitely like romances, if you think about King Arthur's court and whether his queen is going to have an affair with a knight that she's in love with. There's definitely notions of that circulating around in this time period. And I think that Juliet does really believe that she has this great love match with Romeo. I will say, people read the novel and they say to me, I'm just so surprised at what you did with Romeo. And I say, everything that Romeo is and does in my novel is actually in the play. Go back and look at the play. That again, Romeo's a dirtbag. I am a Joe. But yeah, there is a notion of that. But really, and again, it's not just, I think part of the misconception I had was that, well, females were married off to align power or financial or political or social interests of families, but males were too, that if you were from a wealthy family, the paterfamilias of your family was going to decide who you were marrying and when you were marrying, whether you were male or female. And so this is less gendered than we might think, because we have this kind of, I think, a later conception of women circulating on the marriage market.